Welcome to the fourth module of BEAT training. In this module, we're talking about methods for direct observation of physical activity, and in particular, two tools for assessing physical activity in place. One is SOPARC, the System for Observing Play and Recreation in Communities. The other is called SOFIT, System for Observing Fitness Instruction Time. Let's get started. The objective of this course is to understand the uses of direct observation for built environment research, including the two previously mentioned direct observation tools, SOPARC and SOFIT. We will go through both the SOPARC and SOFIT methods to understand how they can be useful in our own communities, and we'll touch briefly on how to adapt these tools to the needs of your project or study. Direct observation tools allow for real-time assessments of physical activity behaviors in a certain space or place. Unlike environmental audits, direct observation methods record the activity that goes on within a selected environment, which makes them very useful for understanding whether an environment is conducive to physical activity or other health behaviors. With direct observation, you can collect information on the characteristics of people in the space, including things like race, ethnicity, age, gender, the types of activities people are engaging in, and their general level of physical exertion. Rather than focusing on the qualities of the environment itself, direct observation requires assessing the people using a space, or if people are not using the space, noting their absence. This method is a good way of understanding who engages in physical activity in a particular setting and who doesn't. If you're interested primarily in how a built environment is being used or not used for physical activity, direct observation methods like those we'll discuss in this module can stand alone. However, they are often well suited as additive research methods. If you're interested in assessing physical activity in a particular neighborhood, for example, your study might benefit from the use of both an environmental audit like the ANC as well as a direct observation tool. Combined, these will tell you about the state of resources and amenities within the area that might impact physical activity behaviors, and how people are actually using those amenities. Now we'll run through some of the similarities and differences between the two direct observation methods we cover in this module, SOPARC and SOFIT. The main difference between these two tools is in their use cases. SOPARC is designed to assess physical activity in open environments like parks, where the number of participants and what they're doing might change frequently over time. Because activity might be vastly different between different spaces of a park, SOPARC asks you to divide the space you're observing into target areas, which will be observed separately. SOFIT, on the other hand, is designed to assess structured fitness activities like PE lessons, personal training sessions, or exercise classes. These are more stable environments in terms of use and participation than a park. Instead of providing estimates on who is using the space and what they're doing, like SOPARC, SOFIT is more concerned with how physical activity is being taught or delivered in the environment under observation. Both methods operate similarly in terms of outcome measurement and how observation is actually done. Participant physical activity is the outcome of both SOPARC and SOFIT measures. And for both, the way physical activity is assessed is through short, snapshot observations of what people are doing in a particular moment in time. For SOFIT, this is a series of 10-second observations over the duration of a class or lesson. For SOPARC, this takes the form of multiple sightline scans of each target area, which usually add up to about a minute of time observing each area. Finally, both methods can provide information on the physical environment as well as the social by documenting the kinds of activities people are doing and the qualities of spaces that they're using. First, we'll do a quick overview of the SOPARC tool and methodology. Links to the full protocol and other resources on using SOPARC are available on this module's webpage. Parks are common throughout the world, particularly in urban and semi-urban areas, and they often offer places for people to be physically active. Because parks are usually public and free to use, they are good places to assess in order to understand physical activity behavior in a neighborhood or region. Unlike a gym or exercise facility, though, parks are not usually developed specifically for physical activity. Many have areas for sitting and socializing, and some may even contain cultural institutions or event spaces, as well as recreation spaces. So the types and amounts of physical activity being performed in a park will probably vary in different areas of that park based on what amenities are there. We also know from previous physical activity research that people's preferences and habits related to things like exercise, leisure walking, and sports vary by preferences as well as their backgrounds. Race, ethnicity, gender, and age are known to impact people's rates and types of physical activity. SOPARC is a useful tool because it measures many facets of park use for physical activity. Data collectors do a series of simple visual scans of park areas to note the features of the park itself and the characteristics of the people who are using it. Their observations of the space are logged and tallied in a simple accounting that enables you to characterize who is using the park and how they are using it. The first thing you'll need to do when using the SOPARC method is map out the park you want to observe and divide it into different target areas. In the example shown here, which is from the Parks study in St. Louis, the target areas are filled in by different colors. A target area in a park is any space that might facilitate physical activity. Usually, target areas are defined by a big feature or amenity that would determine the kind of activity being done there, like a basketball court or a swimming pool, and you determine what makes the most sense based on the park you're looking at. For really large parks with lots of amenities or activity spaces, it's probably necessary to further divide areas into sub-target areas. But either way, the point of doing this is to delineate the full park into chunks of space that are observable by the naked eye for the visual scans that data collectors will do. You can make a target area map using satellite imagery available online or by using a copy of existing maps provided by park operators. Using these maps as a guide, the SOPARC protocol recommends walking through the park at least once, if not several times, to determine what different target areas should be. Often, a park will have existing divisions, like fences or roads, as well as dedication to particular types of activities, like courts or fields devoted generally to a specific sport or event, and that'll make it easy to assign these places as individual target areas. But you can also look simply at where the park is typically used. If there are often people congregating in open lawns which have no specific purpose or dedication to a particular sport, you should probably include those as target areas as well. You may want to simply divide the park evenly so that you have full coverage of all of its areas. It depends on the aims of your study and what you hope to learn in your research. The process of walking through the park can be a collaborative activity with your research team. Once you determine your target areas, you can draw your map, digitally or on paper, or both, according to your needs. Target areas should be ordered. The first target area is generally the one with the predominant indoor park feature, like a gym or a community or visitor center. If the park does not have one, then start with the most prominent outdoor space, like a football pitch or track. Paths, sideways, and trails should be labeled as unique areas and not observed as part of other target areas. Remember that target areas should ideally be distinguishable by what activities normally occur in them, so it makes sense that pathways where people are habitually moving should get their own observations. Finally, select observation points in each target area. Again, depending on the size of your park, you may need more than one per target area, but ideally there is one location in each target area from which data collectors should do their visual scans. It's helpful to select permanent or easily distinguishable landmarks as observation points, especially if you have a large team of multiple data collectors, to ensure that everyone is observing from the same spot. When you're preparing to begin SOPARC observations, you'll want to develop a schedule and a route by which data collectors can move through each target area. SOPARC observations are generally divided into different time periods, so to ensure reliability between data collection shifts and data collectors, make sure the data collectors start at the same time within each time period, and that they follow the same routes through each target area. The example data collection form you see here is again from the Parks project in St. Louis. In that project, morning observations began at 8 a.m., afternoons at noon, and evenings at 4 p.m. You might decide that other start times make more sense for your observation. The most important thing is to make sure the data collectors consistently start at the same time in each time period and follow the same route through park areas during their observations. The St. Louis Parks project team has customized some elements of this data collection form to suit their needs. You may wish to create your own form, even if it's a simple spreadsheet, if you plan on customizing the SOPARC tool at all from the standard. There are templates and apps available to help. In the St. Louis study, the park this team was observing was quite large. They had to divide the park into sub-target areas, which helped narrow down the visual field for observations. After walking around the park to create the map, the team also noticed that some spaces included accessibility features, such as ramps for wheelchairs and strollers, which they thought might impact the use of those spaces for activity. So they decided to add that as an observable condition of each target area. Another area for potential customization is in the collection of demographic data like race and ethnicity. Depending on the area you're observing, these categories can and should change to reflect the people whose activities you might be documenting. Once these modifications are done, the primary purpose of this form is for noting down counts of people in these smaller boxes. To count people, you can use a mechanical counter or a specially designed app for SOPARC counting called SOPARC. It's available to Apple devices. Links and examples are on the module webpage. As with all environment-based assessments, make sure data collectors are prepared for time outside with water, sunblock, raincoats or umbrellas, pens and pencils, their counter if needed, and any other necessary gear. During an observation, data collectors are asked to note 3 categories of information. First is administrative, like the area they're observing, the time, and the date. The second section is on the qualities or conditions of the target area. Some of these are self-explanatory, but we'll pull out a few to serve as examples. If a park area is not accessible, it's usually locked or closed off in some way, by a fence or signage indicating that it's not to be used. An area is only unusable if it's not fit for its general purpose, a flooded field, for example, or an empty pool. An area is equipped if the tools or accessories needed to serve its purpose, like basketballs on a basketball court, are provided by the park for that place. A user bringing their own basketball, for example, would not count here. An area is supervised if the activities being undertaken there are being done under the oversight of a coach, a trainer, a leader, or some kind of staff attendant. An area is organized if it's an obvious team event. Not a casual or pickup game, but a local recreation league or a school team would count here. There's also a space for comments. This should be used to note anything that might affect physical activity in the area. For example, if there are signs encouraging or discouraging certain types of activity, or if an area is only partially accessible or partially usable. The bulk of an observation is the third part. This is where data collectors will record what they learn from their visual scans. Observations are made in the order you see on the form, and in the first column, data collectors will scan the area for the primary activity in the target area of people who appear to be female. In this example, we'll assume that there's a local league baseball game happening. We'll say that most of the women in the target area are playing the game, and most of the men are in attendance spectating on benches and lawn chairs. When prompted for secondary activity, we need to consider if there is anything that a substantial minority of females or males are doing. A list of potential activities for primary and secondary listing is at the bottom of the form. In this example, let's say that there are also a fair few women sitting and observing the baseball game. But we've already said that the overwhelming majority of men are sitting, so we've already accounted for that in primary activity, and there's no need to list a secondary activity for them. After determining activity types, the data collector will count, first female, then male, how many people belong to each activity level, age group, and ethnicity category. Activity level is divided into sedentary, walking, or vigorous, S, W, or V, with vigorous meaning anything that is more vigorous than an ordinary walk. These are all separate scans, so the data collector will observe female physical activity levels first and pause and record that data. Then they'll observe how many women belong in each age group and pause and record that data, and then do the same with race and ethnicity. Since you're capturing a snapshot of activity every time you look up, your numbers might not always sum up to the same thing. People will go in and out of the target area, and that's okay. Once this process is done for female observations, we do the same thing in the same order under secondary activity and for males. Since we've said that there is no relevant secondary activity for males, no need to record the numbers here. Once you've recorded all the data, one observation is complete. You'd then go on to your next observation point until all are completed within your target area and its designated route. Now let's do a brief overview of SOFIT. As we mentioned earlier, SOFIT is a way of observing classes, lessons, or practices related to physical activity, any kind of physical education or sports practice that includes coaching or teaching. These physical activity contexts are important to measure because we know from previous research that actual time spent in moderate or vigorous physical activity is highly dependent on how a class is taught and organized. You might observe a physical education class for younger children, for example, in which a good quarter of the lesson time is spent explaining the activity, and that will lead to very different physical activity levels over the course of the lesson than something like a weekly practice time for a young adults football league, where little instruction is necessary. SOFIT measures three things: how active participants are, the organization and context of the lessons or classes in which they're participating, and how the course facilitator or instructor is behaving. You may be wondering why we're including SOFIT in a course designed to teach about the ways to measure the impact of the built environment on physical activity. Well, if you remember the ecological model of public health from the introduction module, the primary purpose of looking at the built environment is being able to optimize the impact of various physical activity resources and interventions for large groups of people. Fitness classes and coaching environments include elements that span the middle two levels of this model. A fitness class can be considered a physical activity environment, which we know from our previous modules needs to be safe, convenient, accessible, and supportive in order to help its users meet and exceed physical activity goals for health and well-being. In addition, research shows that physical environments that may encourage recreational physical activity, like parks, fitness centers, playgrounds, and open streets, are often activated by programming related to exercise and sports. SOFIT offers a good way to assess whether programs and activities contribute to the role of the environment in increasing physical activity in a given community. Like SOPARC, SOFIT aims to collect data about physical activity that is representative of typical use or participation in a fitness environment. In order to do this, you'll have to determine a schedule of assessment that enables your data collectors to figure out what a usual class period or fitness course looks like for participants. So you'll want to consider how long your assessment period ought to be, the number of times you'll visit a class or training, and what schedule represents normal use. For example, is this a school-based program that occurs at the same time every day? If so, you'll want to go a few times on different weekdays. On the other hand, if you're looking at outdoor yoga classes that meet at a park on Saturday mornings, you can simply go every Saturday for a few weeks. To that end, you'll also want to figure out what classes or activities are eligible for assessment. This may depend on whose physical activity behaviors you're most interested in understanding. If you're looking at a big space, like a park, you may want to observe a few different physical activity classes or practices, which may meet in different areas of the park, and this would mean setting up multiple different observation schedules for each kind of class. Finally, you'll need to actually schedule your observations. If you're planning to observe a school class or a training that doesn't occur in a public space, you may need to notify or get permission from educators or instructors in order to observe. You'll also need to create protocols for your data collectors, just like in parks, that clearly outline the steps they will take in visiting each education or training. Finally, you'll need to bring your materials and forms. We'll talk a bit more about these in the next two slides, but remember that the full SOFIT protocol and other resources are linked in this module's webpage. Data collection for SOFIT is driven by a timed audio recording, which data collectors listen to while observing. The audio recording prompts you to enter information at specific times so that you're systematically recording information over the course of a whole class. These observations are divided into three phases. First, you'll observe student physical activity levels by observing 5 students one at a time. Whether they're resting, vigorously playing a sport, or walking to warm up or cool down, you'll note that. Next, you'll take note of the lesson context. This is essentially to record whether class time is being used for physical activity itself, to explain administrative matters, or to share activity-related content, like strategy or physical fitness information. You have 2 options in the third phase. You'll either record the teacher's interaction with physical activity promotion or their involvement with class activities. For example, are they promoting fitness in general, actually demonstrating how to do something, generally instructing, or engaging in some other task? You'll record all of this information on a form like the one shown here, which uses shorthand codes that can quickly and easily be reported. We'll explain the coding in the next slide. Here is a zoomed-in version of the recording form that you saw in the last slide. We'll go over how to use it before we conclude the module. First, you'll have some administrative information to fill out. This should look pretty similar to what you saw in SOPARC. There's some direct observation about who is attending, the teacher, and the lesson. Once you get into actual observation, remember that there are 3 phases. First, you're assessing student activity levels. Here, the numbered codes are ordered generally from least active to most active, lying down, sitting, standing, walking, or engaging in vigorous activity like running, jumping, or playing sports. Then, you record the context of the lesson or class. There are 3 main types here: general or administrative content, like talking about what the class will entail or how to sign up for the next one; knowledge content, like how to stretch properly or some other information about physical activity itself; and motor content, which means people actually engaging in physical activity. Motor content is divided into 3 subgroups: fitness, practice, and gameplay. There's also an other option if the activity underway doesn't match any of these categories well. Finally, teacher engagement. This form asks about interaction with physical activity promotion, but remember there's other options as well to record teacher involvement. You can read more about that in the full protocol if you think it will be helpful to your study. Once everything has been recorded and you've finished the observation, you can summarize your findings in a form like this one, which will allow you to compile and compare observations across the different classes that you attend or across different time periods. More information on managing and analyzing SOFIT data is on the module webpage. That's all for SOPARC and SOFIT and direct observation. To take this module's quiz and test your assessment skills, return to the module webpage. There, you'll also find resources for additional reading about direct observation related to physical activity and the environment, and the full protocols for SOPARC and SOFIT. See you in the next module.